here in the BTAC?
I think I'm one of two. Hello, good.
We're live.
Yes, good afternoon or evening all. I hope you all can hear us well. For those who are live with us, I think we have about 20 some people. And this is being recorded. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Mjiba Frey-Hewat, and I am a research fellow at the Institute of African Studies here in Ghana at the University of Ghana, and I'm a member of Blacklash Collective. I want to introduce my colleagues, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Blacklash Collective, and then we're going to get started. So we have Jared Ball, who is a professor at Morgan State University, and he will tell you a little bit more about himself once he speaks. We have Todd Stephen Burrows, is it Burrows, right? Who is in New Jersey and is a professor at multiple institutions, of which he will tell us which one he wants to claim here. And he is a media person. And we have Dr. Ayele Echele, whose name I always pronounce incorrectly. And she is a professor and head of department at Prince George's Community College in Prince George's County, Maryland, which I just want to say for the record, I would have loved to work at that institution. So I wish you were there when I was thinking about getting a job. So today, who are we? So the Blacklash Collective, the Africana Collective, engages in interdisciplinary research to provide analysis and recommendations on a range of issues affecting the Africana world, linked to communities with peoples of African ancestry. Using our collective knowledge and skills, as well as our grounding as thinkers, educators, activists, organizers, and parents, our objective is to support and inform action towards safeguarded human development throughout the African world. We are independent in our funding, research, and directives, allowing us to work decidedly in the best interests of said community. So basically, we don't have any funding. No one gives us money. Rockefeller, Ford, DuPont, none of those people are funding us. So what we say is completely, what'd you say?
Not even Oprah? Come on, Oprah is funding people.
Oprah's also not funding us, but if someone wants to, shout out to Oprah and she's interested in funding Pan-African activity, then maybe, but I'm good. So we have about 29 people on the call right now. So just to let you all know, we will, for the first hour, we'll be discussing our topic. And our topic this week is an interesting topic, right? It's titled Political Organizations versus Reparations, for whom and for what. And so I have the distinct pleasure of moderating or hosting the first half. And in the spirit of my colleague Todd, I am going to start out just by asking questions about our colleagues' introductions or interventions. And if anyone hasn't seen the report, there's like a green button that says download the report at the bottom. You certainly can do that. If you have questions that we want to raise down at the bottom, there's a ask a question section, and you can also ask questions in the chat. So we know that this is the eve of Unthanksgiving, right? And some people are off cooking turkeys. Listen, I'm not judging. If you're cooking a turkey, that's fine. If I was in the US and I was in California, I would be at the sunrise ceremony in Alcatraz, but I'm not. So we understand that, but we also recommend, sharing this video once it gets published and also engaging in the conversation offline. So I am going to start off by talking to Dr. Ayele Echele, from Prince George's Community College. So you sort of talked a little bit about reparations from an organization from a very interesting perspective, right? You use a term called modernity, mother-ernity. So like basically modernity, but mother-ernity. And I was wondering if you can start off by telling us a little bit about what that is, and why that's relevant or why that is relevant in organizations. And I think that perhaps once you're having conversations about this term, you can help us with your definition of organization. So you got about 5 minutes to answer those questions. The floor is open.
Thank you, Sister Jiva. Yeah. Really quickly, I wanted to be sure that people didn't start thinking that I'm the head of my department, because that's not me. But I am the director of the African American Studies Institute at PGCC, and you know I would have had your back, okay? But no, so modernity is a combination of mothering, mother, and modernity. And this really, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that others have kind of asserted the idea that African people are the first modern humans, because it was on our backs, our blood, sweat, and tears, our forced labor and dislocation that the modern age was built. So this concept comes from Oyeronke Oyewumi and other African women scholars who, Diane Diakite, who really talk about the ways in which motherhood is in and of itself an ethic, a praxis, and an approach to survival, it's an organizing principle that has helped us to build sustainable communities and also sustainable movements. So my approach to looking at this, I use the modernity concept in my work to talk about the ways in which this concept is not about a woman with a womb bearing a child, but it's a relational category and an organizing principle that really guides our more successful movements. And if we're looking at our organizations and what would make African organizations, I think, more effective, is to implement and kind of intentionally focus on the ethics, the practices, and the principles of modernity. And these are things that are obviously African culturally based, but it is about nurturing and care and concern for the humanity of the people within an organization. But it is also very much about strategy, resource management, and necessary destruction, right? A mother is not just a creator. A mother is also a destroyer when things are necessary, and destruction has its place within our movements, right? So yeah, there's much more to say about that. That's obviously in the report, but I think with my report, my intervention, I wanted to really focus on I see reparations as kind of a problematic. The mainstream discourse on reparations is problematic, and the approaches that I see, I think, are narrow. And I think without strengthening our organizations first and strengthening our social cohesion and getting our ethics together, even if reparations happened, this would not really get us where we think we want to go. And one of my biggest critiques is really about the geopolitically narrow scope of reparations, being that most of what we're hearing is a U.S.-centric conversation, and a very individualistic conversation about like an individual payout. Everybody gonna get a check. That whole cut the check movement. And I'm sure we'll talk much more about ADOS and all these other folks out here who are kind of pushing this new thread within the reparations movement. But I still think there is value there to have the conversation, because I want to make it clear that I do think African people are owed reparations. But I think that we have some other conversations and some other things we need to get straight before we get to that point. And I don't sound really scholarly right now, but I hope that I'm being clear. All right, and yeah, there'll be more to that, but you are
being clear.
All right, cool.
You are being clear, and we're gonna come back to the modernity, right?
Yes.
Because I want to talk about to hold this question, I want to talk about the difference between this and the social revolution. Is there a difference? Are there similarities? Are they connected? Like, I want us to think through this. And I also want you, once we come back to you, which will come around, I also want you to define organization.
Okay.
Like, what is an organization from your perspective? So hold those for us. Todd.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you ready?
Not am I ready.
Excellent.
So that I live for these conversations, because at some point you get warmed up, Sister Mujiba, and then you take it over. And I just wait for that. And then all of a sudden you forget that it's 11, 12 o'clock midnight. You forget that.
Exactly.
So I'm just excited. I'm just all this prologue for you to step up, because I can't wait to see that.
I am lucky this time, and you all are lucky also, that I am moderating. So Todd, let's talk a little bit about your project and your intervention and your thoughts. So I liked how you started out by, sort of giving us a historiography of your introductions to reparations and organizations. I thought that was a really interesting dynamic to sort of show how you got introduced to organizations. So the first question I want you to ask me to respond is, first of all, why did you, or how did you, when you say you came to reparations or organizations through this progressive radio program, how do you think that impacted your outlook on life as a young African or Black boy living in New Jersey? You were in New Jersey at the time, right?
Right. I was exposed to Black media. First of all, not even knowing it was Black media as a kid, growing up in the 70s, listening to AM soul radio. But then later on, I was exposed to newspapers like the City Sun and radio stations like WLIB. And so I'm very much beholden to radio and newspapers and Black public affairs shows, particularly Gil Noble's Like It Is, for the political and cultural socialization that I have. So I was introduced to all of these movements and to all of these things, including reparations, through that. Now, what was important to me, I guess, and I mean, I have 3 degrees in mass media, so as you see, I'm very attached to the presentation, the media presentation. What I learned from that was that there were people in the world who thought differently than other people in the world who, because these other people in the world were on these different radio stations and different television channels and different newspapers, and did not sound at all like the people who were on WLIB or who were in the City Sun. And so it was great to understand that there was a revolution that was happening around the world, particularly South Africa was huge for me, being in college. And I learned so much from these vehicles. In terms of reparations, it was something that even in the Black media, though, was kind of whispered, half whispered, because Cobra didn't form until 1987. So it was, so when I was listening to Black radio, when I discovered Black News Talk Radio, that was a new organization, right? I definitely had not heard of the Republic of New Africa. I only heard of the All African People's Revolutionary Party when I had the honor of introducing Kwame Ture at Seton Hall, when he spoke at Seton Hall in 1989. So much of what I've learned has been an oral tradition and a literary tradition. So I relate to our struggle very much in that orality. And that's why I like to talk about this, and that's why I've struggled to keep up with Dr. Iqbal's broadcasting for 20 years now or so. I have found that I'm a better guest than I am a host, which is why I'm very happy to be a guest right now and being asked questions. But the orality, I feel very much connected to on a psychic level, and I feel the collective memory. Particularly now, as I write now in my 50s, I feel more of the collective memory of ourselves when I sit down to write. So when I sit down to write, I'm not only thinking about myself, but I'm thinking about all of the writers who have written. And so when I hear us speak, I hear all of the people who have spoken. That's why, again, I wait for Mujiba to get warmed up, because then, the ancestors just move on in, and then she goes with the truths, right, the plural, right? So that's how I view these things. I mean, it's very artsy-fartsy, I know, but I'm a writer, so I get to be that.
Okay, excellent. So when we come back to, after we get to talk to Jared, I want you to think through the question of what is an organization to you? Because you sort of are raising some interesting things about the different types of organizations or the different formations. And I would also like for you to think through or think about the role of political education in said organizations, right? And then we'll come back another round. So thank you very much. So Jared, the floor is on to you now. And I want to start off by asking you to discuss something interesting around the question of, so you mentioned this question of reparations is a political contradiction. I'm sorry, I've got notes everywhere. What do you mean by that? It's a political contradiction. I think on one of these pages, you mentioned that reparations is a political contradiction. And before you go there, I want you also to think through this question about, you also mentioned that African people should not be like Jews. You say no legitimate Pan-Africanist or nationalist would want to model a liberation after Israel. I'm wondering if you could tell us why that's the case. The floor is yours.
Well, I'll start with that second part. I think you might need to mute. Oh, thanks. I think that I'll start with the second part. What I was trying to say is to differentiate, to not say that Black people shouldn't be like Jews per se, but that Black people shouldn't be like Zionists and try to seek reparations or some sort of geographical land or, or nation or whatever on the pretense that was required for Israel to become Israel, which is to become a European imperialist outpost somewhere serving that process. So that's what I'm saying. And then I was also saying that people should read Norman Finkelstein's Holocaust Industry book, which is an amazing read, which details how basically elite Jews ripped off the reparations movement for Jews and basically pimped out the whole Nazi Holocaust for their own benefit and actually denied actual survivors, including Finkelstein's parents, any significant, at least his mother. I think his father got something more than his mother, but I also think it came from Germany and not the United States, something like that. But anyway, but the point being, his whole point was similar to what I started with. He was saying, what kind of deals are being made in order for Jews to get reparations? They're not politically advanced. And as someone who supports Palestinian rights, he's very critical of that whole thing. And then of course, an elite Jewish bourgeoisie ripped off their own people. So when people, in our communities and Black communities often just quickly say, well, Jews got reparations, we should get it too. I don't think enough of our folks are looking at the details of what that really entails. And then similarly, when they say the same thing about the Japanese, I made a quick reference to that in my piece too, that the Japanese got almost nothing, $20,000, I think, a piece after having lost billions of dollars of worth of land in California. I mean, so like, what do we really, But then my point initially about the contradiction, the political contradiction, is that so much of the reparations movement, which I'm always being told is an argument for our sovereignty and independence, is dependent upon the United States government and its system of electoral processes, which would be required to get this shift of the GDP or the wealth in this country over just to Black people. So on the one hand, Black people are saying, we don't want anything from whites. We want to do anything our own. We don't want anything for them. We don't want to be with them. This is all Black nationalism. But on the other hand, they're saying what they're not really saying, but tacitly agreeing to, is that we would have to work with white people and others to get their vote, to get them. And as we just saw with this last election, I can't think of anything less tactically viable right now. So it's not a question of do we want reparations or not, or do we deserve it or not, or are we separate or different or distinct from other people who have also suffered. That's not my point. My point is there's a lot of contradictions in here, and too many of our folks are doing is, I think, encouraging that we go towards this pot of gold, this mythic pot of gold, as opposed to doing the real hard work of grassroots political organization. And so where I'll stop here is in reference to your own piece, MG, where you talk about the AAPRP and other, more, I think, appropriate standards for what reparations would look like on a revolutionary political thing. But what I've grown up and been sort of politically raised in is that we want political power, not reparations. We don't, if we have political power, the whole argument over reparations is moot, because society is reordered in such a way that African people can be healed just by the reorganization of the society and the power. So that's what I'm more interested in, as opposed to the tactically unviable or unsound and, I think, wildly contradictory call for reparations.
Excellent. So I want you to be thinking about two questions because we're going to come back around. One is reparations reform. So is the call for reparations a call for reform? And you also make another question. You also make another point about political power. You just mentioned that for African people in the U.S. and abroad. And I'm wondering, where is the seat of that political power? What does that look like, right? And I'm wondering, is reparations a step in the direction of political power or not? ELA suggested, which I thought was such a dynamic point, which I hope that she can talk about, is that reparations is, I just want to read this because I thought it was such a dynamic point. She mentioned something about reparation. If we get reparations, quote unquote, in the US, we'll be more entrenched in this American capitalist system. And that more entrenchment will then do a couple of things. But I want her to talk a little bit about what that looks like. And I want us to now sort of toggle between organization and reparations, because is it a organization or reparations? Kwesi makes it, although he is not, Dr. Konadu is not on the call because he is not able to get through. I'm not sure if there's a network issue. He's suggesting that organizations are have so many internal contradictions that ultimately that they are, for lack of better term, useless is not quite the word that I'm looking for, but in essence, he suggested that they're not really effective. So I want us to also talk about the internal contradictions, or if we even think organizations are the right way to move forward. So this is what people should definitely read the report. So Sister Ayele, please come on back and answer your question.
Yes, so one of the things that comes up often for me in these wonderful conversations is this question of American exceptionalism. And what I always think of in my head, and I only sometimes actually say, is that I think one of our biggest challenges is not American exceptionalism, it's American paternalism. And this is why modernity is so important, because modernity is the response to that. We think America is bound to us and recognizes us as if we are children of this nation, right? Citizenship, being born of here, this whole nativist kind of approach to America, because somehow being born on this soil means that this place owes you something, right? We have, it's almost like we have the expectation that America will practice that ethic of modernity with us and give us what we are owed. But America doesn't function that way. So I'm saying and this is why, again, being grounded in modernity helps us sort things out and make things real clear. America ain't your mama. Lady Liberty ain't your mama, right? Right, captives, not citizens, thank you, Brother Mac. Like, this is really important for us to remember. If we look for the things that mother us, the individuals that mother us, the organizations and the practices that mother us, we will realize how America is not that. sorry, my dog, she doesn't do anything all day until I get on a video, and then she's like over here doing calisthenics. Anyway, so this is, I think, one of the things. An organization is a group of people, to answer your earlier question, united and organized around a common objective, a common purpose, and that structure can change. It can evolve based on the dynamics and the needs of that group of people. So we don't want to fix it in time, right? An organization must be a living thing. But again, modernity allows for that. Modernity allows for those dynamics to shift, because again, if we're thinking Africa is our mother, right? This is why Mother Africa. There's a reason for that. If we shift our paradigm to view ourselves as children of that common mother, as we have in many of our movements, then our loyalty to each other, our ability to kind of evolve and adapt and shift things around as needed to accommodate the diversity amongst us. Like mothers have multiple children, parents have multiple children. Mothering is not just for women, right? Parents have multiple children, and each child gets parented in a different way based on the individual child's needs, and the mother must negotiate and navigate that. The father must negotiate that. And I think that this is the strength of how we need to organize our organizations and put them together to recognize and hold space for the diversity, to have conflict resolution within the organizations. But if we're busy kind of looking at America as the American nation state or the American empire as the place where we're going to get our sustenance, the place that's going to have this ethical approach to us, we're really gonna we're just gonna be having this conversation 10 years from now. And also there's a question in the ask a question box that I hope to respond to directly, because I think that's also tied in with this notion that America is mother, and I have to buck against that at every turn. So and the question you raised about social revolution, should I didn't want to ignore it. I wanted you to know I tried to think about that. I believe that if we really look at some of our more old practices and ways of being, some of our old orientation to the world, it's almost like modernity brings us full circle, as opposed to back. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not looking at time in a linear fashion. The social revolution, as it were, if I'm thinking about the social revolution that you're implying, is a progressive step forward. And I think that, even the African identities we imagine are relatively conservative and very deeply influenced by what we've been experiencing for the last 600, 700 years. And I think we have to look even further beyond that, because a lot of these issues that we're having around identity, sexuality, resources, and the distribution of those resources, a lot of that, the answers to that have been had. The answers and the responses to that, and the social worlds built around those questions that we are seeking out and that progressives are thinking about, like, those have existed here before. We just have to go and fetch them, right? And that's why I think modernity is also useful, because it challenges us to go back and fetch it, and go back and fetch our progressive ideas from the past. There's just things they weren't worried about back then to the same degree that we're worried about them, because we let other people set our priorities and our anxieties and all kinds of other things. So that's it. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I wanted to read a quote from Kwesi's piece, because I think that it's an important thing that we talk about, right? There's a lot of people in the global African nation that are anti-organization. I'm not suggesting Kwesi's anti-organization, but I'm saying there's a lot of people that are anti-organization. There's individual Pan-Africanists. There's people that say organizations have never worked for them. So I want us to also think through what exactly organization looks like, and how can we use organization to really think through the next set, or the way forward for global Africa. And so on the first page, I guess this is our page, whatever this page is, Perspectives, Kwesi Kanadu. I'm suggesting we think about political organization through reparations, which is a different, concept, right? Sometimes through based on what we're looking at from other organizations. He says that is the root mistrust and intercannibalism wrought by colonial slavery, and which reparations seeks to address, inhabits any sustainable political organizing and organizations which require workable levels of trust and discipline starvation to fight the pivot against on or each other. Mass movements don't work, and neither do political organizations of any stripe. The resumes, the fragmentation, the problem of too many organizations and intramural squabbles over finite resources and equally fragmented members, boring this out. So he goes on to suggest that the current manifestation of organizations perhaps isn't working. So I'm wondering, is there a different manifestation? Is there are we judging organizations by men and women's behavior and not necessarily judging organization properly? I'm just wondering if we can discuss that. Kwame Ture suggests that we shouldn't judge Christianity by Christians. I also would suggest that we can't judge Islam by Muslims, and I would also suggest that we can't judge traditional African religion by practitioners, right? So I'm just wondering, how do we juxtapose sort of his approach and his analysis with this other analysis about the importance of organizations, or the historical historical trajectory of organizations and mass movements? Todd, I want to come back to you. Absolutely.
Playing off all of this, I want to tell a couple of brief stories, but before I do that, I want to first talk about what my sister Yele said. Sister Yele, I suffered through 700 pages of Barack Obama, and I have some news for you. America is your mother, and not only is America your mother, according to Barack Obama, he talks about how he judges reality through the eyes of his white grandmother. He credits his white grandmother for not making him a leftist, Afrocentric radical. And there's a very interesting, now, he did a whole book about, well, I hope Dr. Ball's okay there. He did a whole book about his African heritage and his Black heritage, right? So maybe this is his book for white America. I'm just assuming that, right? Because, see, here's some symbolism for you, Dr. Yelling. Here's something for you to use, because you're brilliant and you're going to go speak and stuff. Here's something for you to use. He's in Egypt in the book. And his body man, the guy who gets his soda and stuff, like hangs out with him, plays basketball with him, Reggie Love, says, boss, come down here and look at this. And they're looking at some graffiti on the pyramids, and it looks just like Obama. Now, Obama only casually reacts to that. Reggie Love is more interested than Obama is in that, right? But when you read the book and these white people start talking about their lives or whatever, he connects that to his grandfather and World War II and all that. So see, he is clear on who he's connected to. And it's not Africans. Okay, the man grew up only knowing 3 Black people anyway. I mean, go read David Garrow's book, right? So I'm just saying that I love what you said, because it was so decolonizing, because the new model we've been now given, the Michelle Obama model, the Barack Obama model, is not only a colonized model, but a happy to be colonized model. And so I'm glad that people like you exist who are going to explain African truths to us, because we need that. So I just wanted to say that first. Now I'm going to tell 2 old man stories, because I'm old. I get to tell old man stories. And I think these stories are about how organizations, not that they don't work, but how do you use organizations, right? For 2 minutes, I was part of the Ben Chavis NAACP, one of the most radical, disorganized, dysfunctional, but yet hopeful organizations, right? Because Ben Chavis believed in the Big Tent. And who was in the Big Tent, according to Ben Chavis and his staff? Pan-Africanists, Black nationalists, socialists, communists, right? Now, because of Chavis's lack of discipline, which is, now legendary, of course, he had to resign in disgrace. But there was one thing I learned. Well, there are many things I learned from the experience, and I'll just talk about two briefly, and then I'll tell one more old man story, then I'll be done. The first thing I learned was, and I said this to Don Rojas at his tribute, because he had just finished being blessed out by Lou Myers, because Lou Myers was upset being indirectly referred to in a New York Times editorial attacking the NAACP and attacking Chavis and, referring to Lou Myers' support, being the lawyer of the Nation of Islam. And Don Rojas said something to me very seriously when we talked about this, because he said, you're young, so you have to understand the difference between being an activist and being a revolutionary. Being a revolutionary, it's an honor to be attacked by the New York Times. Now, we have a lot of people who are activists, who claim revolution, Assata taught me, whatever, but let somebody on MSNBC say one wrong word about them, and they would crumble like a cracker. So I think that's one important story. But the other important story from the NAACP I wanted to say is that I met the youth directors back then. And these were all Southern, born-again Christians. And the NAACP youth chapter was basically their social activity outside of the church. And so I saw that, okay, these people are organized, regardless of how some people view their religion, et cetera. They're organized, they have an organization, and they understand their purpose. And I said, okay, that's a positive. There's no way that that's a negative, right? Black Christians in the South organizing. Okay. So that's old man story number one. Now let me tell you old man story number two. I was at an organization called the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is now headed by Ben Chavis. Interesting. Talk about nonlinear, right? When I was there, he was not head of the NAACP, but it was 1995. And this was even before the internet came through. So, we were using fax machines, right? We were doing fax machines. So it was my job as the intern to help do this massive photocopying of all these Black newspaper columnists and all these people that I later joined up with, right, in terms of these op-ed pages. And I got an opportunity because I had access to this fax machine and I had access to like 200 Black newspapers to do something nobody had done up to that point. And I've never mentioned this publicly, and I've written about it, but I haven't even given that writing public yet. I haven't made that writing public yet. But I'll say this for the purpose of this conversation. What I got to do that nobody else was able to do in 1995 was syndicate Mumia Abu-Jamal to 200 Black newspapers when they were trying to kill him. So I don't know whether the NNPA is a great organization or not. I don't know how we should judge the NAACP, but I do know that there is something called initiative, individual initiative, collective initiative that you take within these organizations. And there are contributions that you can make that may be public or not, that may work or not, but that show that, okay, there is something there. There was a place I could go to after I read Live from Death Row. And I could say, okay, there was something I could do. Something like real, that made real sense, that really helped. Because again, this was before the internet. The internet was developing, the web was developing when they were trying to kill Mumia the first time. So I hope that answers your question. Because I'm trying to get that energy up the way you at this point by now you'd be really so I'm trying to get there. So I hope I got there a little bit. All right. But I think those practical things might help and might give some illumination. So thank you.
Dang, Todd.
Definitely, I think. Yeah, I know Todd came with it today, right? So definitely, Todd, I think that you raised a couple of critical questions, and I think even in the ask a question, we had. We're going to come back to Ayala. Let's come back to this question about the U.S. and reparations and whether African or Caribbean migrants should be allowed to accept reparations. So that's the first question. And then we have a questions. And then we have a point about united fronts, right? Elder Dodua, why am I saying Dodua? I'm sorry. I don't know how I can never say his name. Someone help me. Nobody wants to help me. No problem. Dodua name I'm saying incorrectly. I apologize. Talks about the needing a united front. This is from Dwayne. Is this another word for coalition? So this is an excellent point because there's a history of united fronts, right? In the African or Pan-African community, right? And then there's a question about activists. Activist doesn't really mean much nowadays. And so when you were talking about the NAACP, I worked at the NAACP for 3.5 years. So I'm very familiar with the politics of the NAACP, good, bad, or indifferent. And this question about activism and MSNBC and CNN and using your activist career to launch your political career and activism being, a full-time job. It begins to remind me of Kwame Ture, who suggests there's mobilization and organization. And, which are we participating in? So I think that's a question I want to kind of raise to the collective around, is there a difference between activists and revolutionaries? And if there are, do we need activists? Do we need revolutionaries? Do we need something in between? There's a question, Brother Kwame Shabazz suggested, Brother Kwesi, if I understand him correctly, suggests that reparations and organization shouldn't be oppositional, that we can use the reparations movement as a tool to organize. This calls to mind Kwame Ture again, who used to say that voting can be a tool for organizing African people. And then, yes, I am. Thank you, Brother Tafari. Thank you, Tafari. And then Dwayne suggests, hi, folks. I'm reading the report. Thank you very much. I'm reading the report, Dr. Kanadu's part. It seems to be pro-reparations while critiquing political organizations. Is that correct? And so here are the questions that I don't know if I have any questions that I raised in there, but I think there's a lot of sort of critical points. One, do we need activists and revolutionaries? Do we want to do reform or revolutionary change? Do we transition between, does reform lead to revolution, right? What is revolution, right? And whose mother is who? And so, Jared, the floor is yours. We have about 13 more minutes of this section, so I'm going to try to heat it up until we get to the second side. So, Jared, I don't mean to be putting time frames on you, but my friend, 3 minutes. No, I'm sorry, 2 minutes.
I honestly don't even know what to say. I think that part of the problem is, man, I honestly don't even know what to do with those 2 minutes. There's so many. I'm still struggling with the Obama piece. I read the 3 other books, not this last one, and I can't even believe anyway that anyway. The one thing I will say in this quick second here is that I think that one of the problems to your last point, Mjiba, and that I was trying to get at is that reparations, I think, has become not a tool to use for greater organization, but it has become in and of itself the goal. And that's why I like the way we phrase this week's or this month's question of versus reparations versus political organization, because I don't see them working in a parallel symbiotic way. I see them working against one another. And I see them being used, especially in this season now. And I hope we can pick this up in the second hour, and we'll just quickly ask folks to stay around We're going to switch up, and I'll be hosting the Q&A, so don't go anywhere. So the exceptionalism piece is being taken up by conservatives who want to, I think, distract us from radical political organization to get us to go for this check, which is I think an endless. Anyway, I just don't see it as being a viable option. So hopefully we'll get to talk more about that in the next hour.
I'm wondering if this check is similar to affirmative action in the 1990s. I'm just saying, I went to school under affirmative action, but I'm just wondering if the check is similar to that. Because now, let's not be clear that affirmative action, quote unquote, measures and opportunities are being rolled back, right? And so now you have, less Africans in school. When I went to undergrad, San Jose State, 3% African of 30,000 people. Right now, you go to San Jose State, you'll be hard pressed to find an African, right? They can't even get in that school. So the question becomes, is reparations the same thing as affirmative action in 2020, right? Ayele said something that I thought was so dynamic, and she was like, there are studies that suggest that the reparations check is going to just go right back into the same economy that we have a problem with. Brother Jared, you mentioned something about Black capitalism. You have a book, The Myth of Black Buying Power, right? And not that we want to, go into this question about Black capitalism or the myth of Black buying power, but I want us to interrogate this question about wealth creation, right? Speaking about institutions, I don't want to name any. I was employed at one at least, but Todd is laughing. But there's this whole question about, Black people just don't have wealth, and we just need to create wealth, and that's going to solve all of our problems. So I would like for you, Jared, to tackle that as the last round of this discussion about Black wealth, right? And if in fact this reparations, so-called reparations, is going to bring us Black wealth. Ayele, you made this point about the importance of mothering or modernity. I swear I'm going to get this word inside political organizations, and how it's not a gender-based. It should not be gender-based. I want you to talk a little bit about the history of some organizations and how perhaps this could have helped us resolve some internal contradictions around gender, right? And Todd, I'm wondering if you can raise your thoughts around, and everyone will have 2 minutes. I'm wondering, Todd, if you can raise your thoughts, and Ayele, if you want to raise that first question, please, the floor is open. I want you to raise your thoughts about the role of media, both traditional and social media in organizations, right? And I know political education. Are you running away from us?
That's very easy. So I can do
yes,
that right
please.
now. All right.
Go ahead.
In the mass media era, we had the white press, right? And so we needed Black newspapers, Black radio, Black television shows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they served as a locus. I mean, again, that's why I loved working for the NNPA, because when I wrote for the NNPA, I was writing literally for Black newspapers in 38 states. Now, in 1995, 1992, 93, 94, 95, that was a big deal, right? Today, in the demassified era, we now have the capability of all having our own media, which has paradoxically disorganized us. And so it's been a weird situation, because as Joe Torres and Juan Gonzalez write in their classic book, News for All the People, it was the decentralization of media that allowed for people of color to have more power and more access. But now we have this kind of constant, never-ending either CB marathon, if you want to go back to CB radio, or we have this kind of never-ending talk radio show that has pretended to be us informationally enfranchising ourselves, but what it's really done is take out all of the common points of reference, even the radical points of reference that we use to organize. The Pittsburgh Courier, for instance, was a newspaper that had 15 different op-ed columnists, including Black nationalists, communists, socialists, and even Republicans. So if you pick up the Pittsburgh Courier, you got a very good cross section. But now we don't have that kind of thing anymore because everybody wants their own thing and everybody has their own thing. So it's hard to create a point of reference for all of us that would allow us to understand what our predicament is, how we got in this situation, how we get out. And let me just say this, because you're moderating, so you can't say it, so I'll say it for you. I am amazed at the amount of material about Black activism that doesn't include the history of Black activism. As if every single person, and I'm not going to name any names, Black Lives Matter, all of those folks, I'm not naming any names about any of those folks, all the people in MSCC all day. I'm not naming names. But it's interesting to me that they start with their point of reference as if there were no Paul Robeson, as if there were no Pan-African movements, as if there was no African Blood Brotherhood, as if there were no people before them. And they just shout out to, Harriet Tubman and, Rosa Parks. They do the shout out, but the whole conversation becomes hollow until you realize that the point of the conversation was not to create anything that had a historical or cultural basis, but what the purpose of the conversation was to promote their ideas onto the new spectrum. And that drives me up the wall, because it's like saying that not only do I not stand on anybody's shoulders, I was never in the same room with these people. And there were thousands of people around the world who believed in people like Maurice Bishop. This is not some confusing thing, but we've made it confusing now because our mass media is completely without the social historical perspective that one would demand, and without the editors to stop people and say, go back and read, go back and look at this, that we have this kind of ahistorical and acultural Black movement.
Todd, all I can say is yes. Thank you very much, Todd. Todd has summed it up.
I just wanted to help you out there.
Okay,
so I know you've been holding back. You've been doing so well holding it back. So I said, let me help her out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Jared and Ayala, you have like a minute because we're going to transition. But I just want to say there's two things. One thing is that Craig mentioned ADOS is organized. I personally wasn't going to bring ADOS up, but that's just me personally. And so in the second half, perhaps we can dissect what is organized and who makes up an organization and what are the components of organizations, right? Do there have to be institutions? Does there have to be a political education process? Can it be on YouTube, for example? I don't know. I'm just asking. And so with that, and there's also a question about which Jared, this is for you to think through how we raise it. In the question, Martin asked us, are the reparations being paid by the University of Glasgow? Are they positive? So Todd, 30 seconds. I know it'll be difficult for you, but you can do it. Ayala, 30 seconds. So let me just do a report. After Ayala goes, we will ask everyone to just hold on for like 30 seconds. I will end the broadcast and log out. Jared will log in, and we will all be asked to migrate to the new session so we can do a very robust question and answer. If in fact one wants to get on stage and make any contributions, we certainly welcome that. Todd, the floor is yours. 30 seconds.
Can we keep these 9 questions?
I yield my 30 seconds. Go ahead.
The questions will migrate with us, and I would suggest we just go ahead and migrate now, since instead of rushing. So I'm going to log off, and then I'll come back in a few minutes. But so stay tight, everybody. We'll migrate you over in just a second. That's just my.
So myself and Jared will leave, but Todd and Ayele will still be around.
Todd is on fire, by the way. Did y'all notice?
I had to help out because I know the sister had so much she wanted to say, but she was trying to keep it moderate. I appreciated that. I respected that.
No, that's good though. This is really important. The stories, you're really putting a lot of really important ideas out here on the table. And I did not know you did the Mumia thing. What in the world, Todd? Who are you?
I'm just a humble writer who, because of Dr. Jared Ball, got to meet all the amazing people.
You can't even funny anymore.
Dr. Ayele. See, look, I appreciate it.
What?
Now, so we're about to go over to the second hour, correct?
Yeah, I think they're gonna migrate all of us over without us having to do anything.
What was the question that Sister Majiba wanted us to answer?
She put a lot of. I have homework. It's in my phone. I was trying to write down all the questions. But we'll get to it all, I'm sure. And then also when the folks that are on in the chat and stuff can also speak, I think it'll move along. Right. Now that we can just really focus on the dialogue. So we'll get to all of it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so I was really interested in the Obama piece because he's set a new model, and he said that he wrote the book for young people to not be cynical and to be involved and active. But it's very clear on what he defines as involved and active. And he believes there's only 2 choices: that you either are cynical or that you completely join the system and improve it incrementally. And that's a wild way to think. But I was thinking about how Obama's not new, but I think it's really about. I think people thought that after the Black Power movement that you had to negotiate with America psychically, psychologically, politically. And I think that Obama is just a reminder that there's a whole bunch of Black people that don't have that issue with America. And I mean, we've had this before. I mean, the heads of the Urban League, et cetera, right? But I think it's new when now we see younger Black people who we think are children of the complexity of the African experience and the African experience, just disavow it. Right. Because Obama in grad school read half of all the things we talk about. He just rejected all of them. And he makes it clear in more than one book that he did that.
Yeah, you can lead a horse to water and it could still drink the Kool-Aid.
There it is.
So that's where we are. So I know I keep pushing this modernity concept, but once I started reading about it, it just started connecting a lot of dots for me as like a guide, like a way to ground ourselves and kind of sort through the madness, and also not be so deeply entrenched in ideology in the same way that we're entrenched in a certain set of values, and the way we interact and treat each other. I think that that's so important. We really need to foreground that more, because a lot of people who have the same ideology treat each other like crap. How are you going to move forward if you don't even know how to be humane to the people on your team? You know, your vision is blurred by lots of things when you haven't got your compass together. Can we redefine reparations to include release of political prisoners, release of mass incarcerated, public trust funds, and land take back of real estate in the spirit of what happened in Philadelphia? That's an interesting question.
I think with Maroon Schultz in danger and Mumia Abu-Jamal in perpetual danger, I would definitely say yes. And I think that any like for instance, I think any health movement, right? Any movement for compassion requires that. And in fact, it brings up to mind what I was what I wrote about, when I listened to Marco Monhill talk about his new book. He said, he and he had some other speakers on, and they were saying, now again, this does require the United States, right? This is required to move in the United States. But they just wanted to point out that, they said reparations was impossible, but yet we all got $1,200, $1,300 when capitalism was in trouble, right? They said that decarceration was impossible. But because of COVID, they started letting out nonviolent, felons. So if we believe we can push this country, I mean, we see now that we have models that we can push this country. It's just that the entire country has to be in jeopardy, which is a very difficult task. For those people want to think of that as a task.
Yeah.
So I'll take a couple minutes and talk about that the third volume of Mumia Abu-Jamal's book on the American Empire is coming out in January.
Oh.
Mumia Abu-Jamal and his film biographer, Stephen Victoria, a white Italian guy from Newark, who did the film Long Distance Revolutionary, A Journey with Mumia Abu-Jamal. They have written a 3-volume set on American Empire. The first is on American history, the way it really was. And the second is about the development of the American war machine and the development of the CIA, and it charts all of the damage that the CIA in America's done. And this third one, I think, is supposed to be about the Supreme Court and the media and other American institutions. And so that volume is going to come out in January. And these are amazing books. They're like 300-400 pages, are fully footnoted. And how this dude continues to do this from jail, even now sick from jail, is just extraordinary. Because as I told Mumia's scholar, I said, if Mumia had just written these 3 books, he'd be a legend.
Wow.
The fact that he wrote 12 books before that, including a very good study on Black religion, by the way. Yelly, I don't know if you read.
Oh, really? That I did not know.
Mumia wrote a very good small book on Black religion. I believe it was his master's thesis.
Oh, see, now I have to find that. If you could send me. Jared and Mjiba say they're over in the second session waiting for us. So my question to the folks that are logged in, if you can look into the top left corner of your screen, do you see schedule session 1 of 2? Can someone type in the chat whether or not they see that? If you click on it, does it give you an option to move to town hall discussion and Q&A at 7 p.m.? I know I can see it and I can select it and move over. We thought we were going to be able to migrate everyone as a group, but it's looking like that's not how it works.
We're going to do that right now. So
okay, so everyone, if you can, please click on schedule session 1 of 2 and then scroll and move down to session 2 of 2 and the town hall discussion and Q&A, and then we'll see you over there. It should take you right over.
All right. See you in an hour or 2, everyone.
Apologies. See you there.